This podcast of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, is sponsored by AAA Heating and Air.
The premier HVAC company in the Midlands is growing. Are you a top HVAC technician?
AAA Heating and Air is looking for dedicated applicants to fill their fast-growing service department with top-notch HVAC technicians.
If you're the best, then they want you. If you're ready to stop working and start a career, you can earn up to $100,000 plus a year at AAA Heating and Air.
Quality candidates will have at least 2 years experience and a good driving record. Benefits include top industry salaries, commission on service and unit sales, set call limits, company-provided take-home vehicle and gas card, company-provided cell phone and tablet, health, dental, and vision benefits, 401k retirement plan with company match, and scaled PTO based on length of service.
Contact Roy and Dana Finley at 803-677-1500 or check out their job postings on Facebook or ZipRecruiter.
AAA Air when you need us. AAA Heating and Air.
Out of the shotgun, pump fake, wide receiver screen, Juice right side, got a cut at the 10. He's on his feet, the 5, and into the end zone. Touchdown Carolina. Touchdown Juice Wells from 17 yards out. And Sanford Stadium goes quiet.
Welcome into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Wes and Chris along with you on this Reaction Monday. That, of course, was Todd Ellis on the call for the Gamecocks radio network as South Carolina drove down the field and got the opening touchdown for Saturday's game. They eventually went on to a 14-3 lead at halftime. Unfortunately, and I brought up this to Colin earlier, I hate to use the cliche, it was a tale of two halves. But that's truly the story of Saturday. South Carolina looking unstoppable in the first half. Unfortunately, Georgia coming out strong in the locker room, outscoring them 21-0 in the second half before picking up the 24-14 victory. And I don't like to be moral victory guy or silver linings guy, but you should feel pretty good at least coming away from Saturday from what we saw from South Carolina.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to this coin. You know, one side being you had a chance to beat the number one team in the country. And anytime you put yourself in those opportunities, you want to take advantage of it and go do it. You know, sometimes, look, you know, we talked all week last week about last year's game. You were never even really in that game. So when you have a chance to do something special and pull it off, you want to take advantage of it. The other side is that, yes, you showed you can compete. You went in there. You know, I think most Gamecock fans going into the game would have said, hey, man, if we just go to Athens and compete, I'm going to be feeling good. But nobody really, when they say that, starts to think, well, if I'm in that spot, am I really going to feel good about it? And obviously, in this case, I don't think you do if you're a Gamecock fan. I think you wanted to get the win. However, the other side of that is you look at kind of the next step. You look at these final, 9 games, and you say every single game is on the table. Every single game is winnable. Every single game is losable. And it really is going to depend on how well you play and how well you continue to show progress as a football team.
Yeah, I mean, going in, I think if you told any game, obviously everybody wants to win the game, right? But especially with this one, on the road, with what you've seen so far this season, with what you know, there's some questions about Georgia, right? But it's still Georgia. They're still the 2-time national champion back-to-back. They're still absolutely loaded with talent despite some questions. You knew it was going to be a very difficult game to win. And so if you told, I think, any South Carolina fan, and if you said otherwise, if your expectation was, hey, no, I expected us to go win the game, hit us up on the Firehouse Subs text line, let us know. But most Gamecock fans, if you'd have said, hey, what about a very competitive fourth quarter game that's a 10-point loss? Most people would have said, okay, I get that. That's progress. Because, look at the last 3 years. This has been not even close.
I think past
41.
I think outscored 88-20 in the past 2 seasons
there you
alone.
Go. I knew I could count on you, Tyler. 29, 27, and 41, I think, were the point margins there. So I think what happened in the game, because of the way it played out, you are winning at halftime. It was not a fluke. Wes pointed this out on social the day of the game. It was not a fluke. You just outplayed them, and that created a hope and a belief, and even this feeling of when you get into the second half that you should win that game. Heck, I think it's not a crazy point. You could certainly argue it, and Shane Beamer argued it Saturday and Sunday. Spencer Rattler said it on Saturday. You could make the point that they should have won that game, right? And so at that point, I think for some fans, it becomes maybe a little bit more frustrating even because you did have them on the ropes. You were winning that game in the first half. And anytime you lose a game, there's always kind of the autopsy, right, of why did this happen. And as you said, Tyler, tale of two halves, so now people are working on dissecting, okay, well, what changed from the first to second half?
Yeah, and I think, so rewatching the game, it kind of felt to me like, all right, yeah, tale of two halves in the results on the field, but also on the other side, I thought this was the latest perfect example of how all the little things are huge, massive things in football. Like the actual kind of down to down of both halves were not really that different when you rewatch the game. It's first half, Georgia drove the ball most of the game, even in the first half. But they miss a field goal early on, a chip shot. They miss on a flea flicker down the field that's open, and they just miss it. And so, I thought in the first half, kind of all the plays that were kind of in the margin, kind of all the plays that were up for grabs, South Carolina made most of those plays. You go into the second half, it's Georgia who made those plays where South Carolina, taking a sack when they're in field goal range, giving up. It felt like Georgia's 4 and 5 yard runs started to become 7 and 8 yard runs in the second half. You go back and look. My thought watching the game live was, wow, South Carolina, this is at the half, South Carolina protected Spencer Rattler pretty well in the half. Rewatching it, it was actually more like down to the milliseconds. Like first half, Rattler was able to get the ball out like just right before the rush gets there. As the game wears on, as Georgia starts to pin their ears back a little bit more, knowing South Carolina needs to throw, those rushers either got home or Carolina has to turn them. You can say, too many penalties. Well, a lot of those penalties were direct result of Georgia's pass rush. So it's not a penalty like it's an unforced penalty a lot of times. It's a penalty that goes back to not being able to actually consistently protect the passer. So to me, both halves weren't really that different. It was just Georgia executed that step better in the second half, where South Carolina came out, executed a step better in the first half, and just looked down to play. They were not intimidated at all by Georgia, which is a credit to them and the staff. But then I thought second half was a credit to Georgia, just being like, hey, man, we're not panicking. We're Georgia. We're talented. We're the number one team. It felt to me like some of those games you watch Dawn Staley's women's basketball team, where first half the other team, gives them their best shot, and then they're just kind of like, well, yeah, we don't really have to adjust that much. We're just going to execute better.
And I think it goes back to the point that I was making of people are always in search of a reason for something happening, right? So, it can't just be that Georgia started Georgiaing, like they just started doing some things, and South Carolina, some of those plays, like you said, Wes, started going against them, and that tackle that you were able to just get somebody on the ground in the first half, you're wearing down. Debo Williams, 80 snaps, right, in this game. You're starting to wear down a little bit. Now that's a 7-yard, or it's a 10-yard run, right? We saw Dajuan Edwards, he started making a lot more plays in that second half too, running the football, as did Dylan Bell, and then Cash Jones had the touchdown run. They were able to get themselves in some manageable downs and distances. So I think what I've seen a lot of, and it's okay, I'm not bashing it, there's been a lot of analysis of, well, obviously something had to change about the schemes. And were there some adjustments that Georgia made? Sure. Were there some adjustments South Carolina made? Sure. I tend to think what happened is Georgia, their advantage on the line of scrimmage was amplified, accentuated in that second half, particularly with, the offensive line getting some more push and the backs starting to wear things down. The defensive line, knowing that South Carolina couldn't run the football effectively, they were able to tee off and they were able to get a little bit more pressure. And I've talked with some coaches around high school and college football, actually, since the game. And really what I've found, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but most of these coaches when I've asked them what changed in the result, they haven't really gone to scheme. They have gone toward something like I just said, like Georgia just teeing off and making some things happen. Guys, the run game was a huge difference in the second half for Georgia. They had 118 yards after contact in total in the game. I haven't broken it down from first to second half, but just your eyes show you a lot of that was in the second half. Dajuan Edwards forced 6 missed tackles, and he had 3 runs of 10 yards or more, right? So they were moving the chains. They were getting in some favorable downs and distances. They were able to create a couple explosive passing plays, and for the Gamecocks, the mistakes piled up. I mean, look, Wes, you talked about the penalties. A lot of those credit Georgia for them. There were some unforced things too, right? I mean, you had, as great as Spencer Rattler played, there were a couple throws he'd love to have back, a couple short arms, one to Trey Knox, one to Omega Blake that were right at the sticks or after the sticks. You had a drop from Trey Knox, Luke Doty, a high ball to him that, would have been a very, very good catch, but just small plays like that you have to make to win a game like this.
I think all those plays we're talking about, and I thought the short arm, you saw the short arm to Omega Blake. Rattler instantly put his hands on his helmet. He knew he missed one. That's a throw that kind of, any other quarterback misses that throw, you're kind of like, or most quarterbacks miss that throw, you're kind of like, well, that was kind of a tough throw. He's running away from a defender. He's throwing across his body. He was kind of having to do that all game long. But that's a throw he makes, and I think he knew, dang, that's a throw I make. So, point being, that's a play. If this is a game where South Carolina's just like the favorite or they win by 2 touchdowns, none of us are even talking about that play whatsoever. But, you had some drops along the way. You had some penalties, again, that some of them are forced. But, I think of games like this, I think of sequences. Mm-hmm. And these games often come down to not just plays, but to sequences of plays. And so, Georgia scores coming out of the half, they started the half much like South Carolina started the first half and went right down the field and scored. Then South Carolina gets penalized on the ensuing kickoff for, I believe it was a hold, might have been a block in the back. Either way, it was an
ill-advised return as well. They probably could have let that one go.
Yeah, so they get penalized on that.
Yeah,
backed up.
Yep,
and they go 3 and out. Then they have a less than ideal punt. So you look at like that whole sequence, it just felt like the momentum completely turned. Then shortly after that, it felt like South Carolina had kind of regained a little bit of momentum. They were moving the ball, found some rhythm on offense, and then that was when the big third down sack happened. So, yeah.
We'll continue to break this down here, a little bit of what Spencer Rattler had to say after the game on Saturday. Coming up, you're listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
It's Reaction Monday.
Sponsored by Carolina Honda Powerhouse. CarolinaHonda.com.
Your home of the Gamecocks in the Midlands. 107.5 The Game. Also heard on the Grand Strand at 100.3 The Game. And in the PD at 100.5 The Game in Florence.
Don't touch my V-neck sweater.
1 and 2 and a 1, 2, 3.
We just shot ourselves in the foot. I mean, we had 11 penalties, I believe. Just shot ourselves in the foot, false starts, wrong formations, just little stuff like that. We know we need to clean up, but man, I'm proud of as hell. I'm proud of my guys a lot. I mean, we battled against the best team in the country and should have won the game.
Welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on a Reaction Monday. That, of course, was the voice of Spencer Rattler talking Saturday after the game about shooting themselves in the foot in that second half. When you look at Spencer Rattler's numbers, near perfect once again in the first half of that game, continuing on how he's played through those first 2 games. Unfortunately, the second half, a little bit of a different story. It does end up throwing 2 interceptions, as Chris talked about in the last segment there. The pressure started getting to him, a couple of ill-advised throws there, but still overall, you love what you're seeing out of Spencer Rattler through these first 3 games. If he can continue to play the way he's playing, South Carolina's going to have an opportunity to win a lot more games this season.
Yeah, he still just looked, in the face of all that pressure he was seeing against Georgia, in pressure-packed. Like we were talking last week about how South Carolina needed to create some like mental and physical pressure on Carson Beck, and I think overall probably didn't do that. But there was a lot of that on Spencer Rattler in this game, and despite that, I mean, late in the game when you got to go try to make some plays, he looked super poised. He looked super confident. He just kind of has this little bit of swagger, a little bit of, I'd say, quiet confidence about him. And you look at the two games that South Carolina's lost this year, the offense has obviously not performed the way you would want, particularly when you look at the North Carolina game. You score 17 points in that game. Not the outcome you wanted. The 14 points against Georgia, a little bit more understandable given the level of competition. Point is, he was under fire a good bit in both of those games. There wasn't a running game to speak of in both of those games, and he still delivered. He still, I think, really kept you in the game. I think we even saw some upgraded elements from Spencer Rattler in this game, Wes. The way I thought his pocket navigation and his scrambling, I thought it was the best we've seen from him at South Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was the leading rusher. Like that's
not a great.
That's a bad thing, but a good thing. It's a good thing in terms of Rattler, but it's a bad thing in terms of your overall team. And as we move this conversation into what it means for South Carolina moving forward, I didn't really go into this game thinking they were going to be able to run it much anyway.
Right.
So with that being said, obviously you got to run the ball better. However, that wasn't like something I circled. I thought, hey, they're going to have to throw the ball all over them if they're going to have a chance. They're going to have to do some of these extension of the running game, quick throws to the outside, which they did, and they had quite a bit of success with it early on. I thought Georgia got really aggressive on the outside as the game progressed at coming up and trying to attack those things, while also just doing a good job of kind of defeating those blocks outside. Early on, I thought South Carolina made some nice blocks on the outside. As it went on, Georgia's DBs kind of defeated those and created some negative plays or no yardage plays on the outside. I thought the loss of Juice Wells, who my going into the game, Gamecock Central prediction was that this was going to be Juice Wells' breakout game, and I think he was on his way.
Yes.
And then you just have, the unfortunate, just freaky injury there to his foot. He'll go see a specialist on Tuesday. And so, man, I thought Rattler played very well, all things considered. Like we said earlier, he'll want a throw or two back. But, I think we've steadily seen him as his game has progressed. I think that's been a trend among the 3 games this year and then the final 3 games last year, is just making those good decisions on when to hang in the pocket, when to get out of there, when to run but keep your eyes downfield to throw, and when to just get the heck out of there and run. He actually had a nice late run that was called back for a penalty as well. And, man, you know what other play I thought was just, for one, a great decision and throw that got wiped out was that ball he floated to Josh Simon.
Oh, yeah.
And, beautiful throw, put him on the run, laid it up over the top of a defender, and they're already down 10, I'm pretty sure, at that moment. So you were in, go time. Like, chances of winning pretty low in that scenario, but I thought that was, the final backbreaker that one got called back, as far as, you needed some big plays in the passing game. You knew that. And unfortunately, as the game progressed, it became more and more like what we saw in the second half against North Carolina, where your opponent is just teeing off. You're getting some big plays, but you're not finding enough consistency overall on offense because of your inability to mix in really any semblance of a rushing attack.
Yeah, you don't want to be living against Georgia, any game, but especially against Georgia, you don't want to be living in 2nd and 10, 3rd and 15, 2nd and 15. That's just not the area you want to be in, and all too often they found themselves there. One more point on Spencer, too. I think we've learned from the first few weeks that it seems like there's a pretty, fairly high percentage of RPOs in this offense, and he seemed to make some pretty good decisions on those as well. I think the staff is still, trying to find ways, Wes, to get anything out of this running game. RPOs is one way, right? So instead of just running into a loaded box and beating your head against a wall, give your experienced quarterback an opportunity to take a look at pre-snap and then post-snap, take a look at it and try to make that decision as to whether or not it's a good one. Obviously, the run game hasn't been there, and that's had a huge effect on this offense. The reality of the situation long-term is that this is something you got to recruit your way out of. I mean, that's just the reality that you're in. Now, short-term, what can you do? Again, I'm with you. I didn't go into this game thinking that South Carolina's going to run for 125 yards. I mean, I thought it would be under 100, but they didn't get enough to be able to keep Georgia honest and to prevent getting in those unfavorable situations. Now, fortunately, your quarterback is so good, and you've had some success in the downfield passing game this year with your receivers and tight ends. You were able to convert some of those opportunities at probably a higher clip than you would think, especially if you take out those penalties, right? But another thing to consider in this game, Wes, I mean, we know Juice Wells missed after that touchdown. He missed the rest of the game. They didn't have AB either. And those are your two best open field wide receivers with the ball in their hands. It's those two guys. You didn't have either of them. And that, I mean, at some point, all these different things piling up, I mean, that has an effect on your offense. It's going to be tangible against Georgia.
I thought just the overall depth started to kind of, show itself or lack of depth at some spots. Linebacker position, they've got to figure out, how to bring more guys along there. And, even some other spots on defense, I thought they just kind of wore down as the game progressed. And, we see this, y'all. Like, I know this time of year especially, I mean, you can kind of anticipate it every single season. Hey, where's this freshman? Where's that freshman? Where's this guy? And we have seen South Carolina continue to tweak their rotations and tweak the depth chart. Honestly, you look at the running back spot and Mario Anderson, he very clearly has moved up in the rotation. Now, you're going to look at the stats from this game and say, he didn't carry the ball very much. Well, South Carolina didn't run the ball very much, period. I think you can look at that as an example that, hey, he's going to carry the ball more as this season progresses. And so I think overall depth, the rotations, that is continuing to kind of play itself out. But we always see coaches kind of pare down their rotation for a game like this. And it is kind of a catch-22 because you go into a game like this and you have a lead, and a lot of that is because the guys that are playing and your guys that you feel best about are playing well. And you're like, well, I don't know if I can afford to take these guys off the field right now, but they're also wearing down as the game progresses. So I think Georgia was a team, even with their injuries, probably that felt pretty good about being able to continue to rotate some guys in, whereas South Carolina goes into this game and they clearly weren't quite ready or didn't think certain young guys were quite ready to continue to play them at such a liberal rotation the way they did, like last week against Furman.
We'll continue talking about that depth as we break down what happened on Saturday between Carolina and Georgia as Reaction Monday rolls on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game.
For over 3 decades, nobody has had a wrestling career like Arn Anderson. Conrad Thompson gets all the stories with Arn.
Would you rather take the cactus bump from the apron to the floor or give Ric Flair your debit card pin?
Number one, I don't have a debit card, but if you think I'd give him my American Express.
Yeah, there you go. Same thing.
I've been poor most of my adult life up until about the age of 25. I cannot be poor again.
Check out Arn every week, wherever you listen.
What you're talking about. Sponsored by Love Chevrolet.
On your home of the Gamecocks. In Columbia, 107.5 The Game.
Also heard on 100.3 The Game in Myrtle Beach and 100.5 The Game in Florence.
You know, all of it. Losing Juice obviously wasn't ideal, but you saw some other young receivers come in, and we got to continue to get those guys going. Nick Harbor, Tyshawn Russell, all of our young receivers. Offensive line, they protected well and gave us an opportunity also. I mean, not good enough, don't get me wrong, but I feel like we've made strides from an offensive line standpoint. I mean, I look around everywhere, and I just feel like we're a better team than what we were 2 weeks ago. And, again, we're not patting ourselves on the back and excited about the way the day went today, but I also know that we've made strides as a team and are going to continue to get better.
Welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on a Reaction Monday here on the game. Tyler West and Chris along with you. That, of course, was Shane Beamer. After the game on Saturday, talking about player development. We just talked about the wide receivers there a second ago, but one of the bigger stories coming away from Saturday was what happened on the offensive line. And as we kind of expected going into this game, we did see some of those freshmen getting action on the offensive line. Tree Babalata getting the start at left tackle, Travon Ball coming in a little bit later on in the game. And as far as pass protection goes, Tree actually graded out pretty well compared to everybody else. And maybe that option at left tackle going forward, it seems like.
I mean, I think we go ahead and just call this one like he's your left tackle.
He's won the job. Yes.
Yeah, not that obviously, everybody competes every single week, all that stuff. We know, but
no, we're not even.
But you're rolling with this guy, right? And I think are there some things he's going to clean up, or there's some things that are going to get way better as the year progresses, as his career progresses. Of course, man. But to be in that environment, you got Georgia's defensive line jumping around, doing all this jump, trying to get you to jump off sides as well. 90,000 strong to hang in there against these guys. I thought Tree really played well, all things considered. They'll clean up a couple of the other things. I think PFF dinged him a little bit. There are a couple of little quick throws to the outside where I think he's going to have to get more and more comfortable blocking guys out in space on those perimeter throws. But, man, Talk about just stepping up when your team needed it. And I think that gives you some hope for this offensive line. Because here's the thing. It's one thing when you're struggling at a position and you have kind of no hope. There's nobody to turn to, and it's just all right, these are the guys. Let's just see what happens. It's another when you have some options. And I think early on, you look at game one, the 9 sacks, and a lot of us were sitting there saying, all right, where can they turn to here? And so I think the emergence of Tree, the emergence of Tro, Beamer said after the game, he told Tro, hey, man, we should have played you even more. So I think moving forward, now that you're past this Georgia game, again, you got a bunch of games that are winnable, a bunch of games that are losable. You're not going to be a team that rushes for 250 yards a game. No. But can you be a team that rushes for 100 yards a game, 120 yards a game? Can you find a little bit more consistency up front? I think that means Tree's your left tackle, Nick G's your left guard, Vershawn Lee is your center, and then I think Tro is your right guard, and your right tackle is going to be either Ja'Kai Moore or Sidney Fugar, and you're going to roll with the 5 as much as you can, let them gel together, and see if you can't bring this group along against true SEC fronts, but not Georgia Bulldog fronts moving forward.
Now, what you mentioned about Beamer saying after the game they should have played Travon Ball more, are you surprised they started Fugar at right tackle as opposed to moving more out there and putting Tree at guard to start with? He did come in towards the end of the first half, but like you said, didn't get
Tro at guard?
Yeah, that's what I meant, Tro at guard, sorry. Didn't get as many snaps as maybe Beamer would have liked to have given him. Are you surprised they went ahead with Fugar at right tackle to start with?
I mean, I won't say surprised. Again, this is a time of year where we're not at practice at all, so I'm sure they had their reasons. It's very easy after the fact to be like, oh, why didn't you do that? But not surprised. I do think though, now that you've gotten through this game, maybe they didn't want to put 2 true freshmen out there right off the bat. And South Carolina drove down the field and scored. That was their best drive of the day with that combination. The first drive of the game. So, I mean, I don't know if you can fault going with that off the bat, but I do think you playing these true freshmen, I think they will continue to get better and better pretty quickly. So I really like the idea of rolling with them. And obviously, guys, if we're going to mention this, we got to also mention the news coming out yesterday. Marquis Anderson out for the season. Hate it for him. Hate it for that offensive line as well. Hate it for everybody because he was a guy who was most equipped after going through spring ball to maybe help you as a true freshman. And obviously, that's not going to be the case now. They're shutting him down, and he will be back, obviously, next year.
Yeah, he'll play a huge role in this team in the future. And again, I've said this a million times on the show, that this was the one guy out of that 2023 class, a class that's already made an impact immediately, full of some really good players, some future NFL players. That was the guy that Shane Beamer identified as saying, this guy will play for us. So had he not been banged up, and I think there's been a couple different occasions, like some tweaks and things like that, to where, now they felt like it made sense long term to go ahead and do this and get him ready for next spring. Even more than Tree and Tro, we might be talking about Marquis Anderson factoring in on this offensive line, which I think that speaks to the class, right? Yes, USC has had enough problems on the offensive line that you're willing and more willing, I'd say, to get freshmen in there. But at the same time, they have to have some semblance of being ready. And so I think that speaks to the type of recruiting that they're doing on the offensive line, where, like, you look at Georgia's O-line, you say, okay, that's what you want it to look like, right? It doesn't yet at South Carolina, but there's no doubt you could be the most down on South Carolina that you've ever been right now, and still look at it and recognize, okay, that's a pretty good offensive line class. And we see Tree and Tro in there. When you factor in Marquis Anderson, former 4-star big-time recruit, you got Jatavius Shivers, who's probably a couple years away, but a big kid. Then you look forward to the 2024 class. You got Cam Pringle, you got Blake Franks, and you have Josiah Thompson in there too, who's now a 5-star according to On3.
Number 9 prospect in the country.
Not bad.
According to On3. So they're actually building as well as they ever have.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say in the modern recruiting rankings era, this is the best they've ever recruited on the offensive line. So it just takes time, though. I think Shivers, a couple of seasons away. Now Marquis, we know, is a season away due to the injury. But Tree and Tro, I think, give South Carolina fans hope to add to that spot and then continue to provide some more depth as well, because you have guys who were starting who would now conceivably be backups.
And Beamer did make it a point to mention that as far as Marquis Anderson goes, it's not anything long-term like an ACL. They just thought it'd be the better option to go ahead and address this issue because it is something that has been nagging him up to this point, going all the way back through camp. They feel like going ahead and getting the surgery done, letting him sit out the year, and being ready to go for next year is the best opportunity for him.
Yeah, and I think, this is one of those things where fans can make the little jokes about, how does it go from about to play to being out for the year? Well, injuries are not some just set thing where, on a video game it says, hey, a guy's out for 2 weeks and he's back in 2 weeks. Everybody progresses differently from injuries. Every injury is different. And they tried many options, according to Beamer, in terms of fitting him up with different guards and stuff like that, braces, et cetera, different treatments. It just was not responding the way they wanted it to. So rather than be something that he tried to play through and then, maybe doesn't play well because of it, is in constant pain, then you're probably looking at surgery at the end of the year anyway. Right. Then you're just delaying the progress. I think it made a lot of sense now to go ahead, have it done. He can go ahead and start progressing from the surgery, moving into the offseason, and be completely full go to start the 2024 season.
Well, I think it's significant you have an example of a guy like Cason Henry who had nagging injuries going through this.
Afford Anything talks about how to avoid common pitfalls, how to refine your mental models, and how to think about how to think.
In the world of money and investing, it can be easy to be dogmatic about your beliefs. You're part of the FIRE movement, Financial Independence Retire Early, or you hate it, you hate it, you hate it. And either you embrace credit cards as a route to getting airline reward, or you follow the Dave Ramsey camp and believe that you shouldn't touch them because if you play with snakes, you might get bit. Afford Anything, wherever you listen.
Summer and through camp, goes out there in the first drive against North Carolina, gets hurt. Now he's potentially lost for maybe this season. We'll wait to get a new update on him hopefully sometime here soon. But you have a recent example of somebody on that end of the spectrum. Hopefully you don't want to have that same situation with a guy like Marquis.
Yeah, and such a young guy. He was going to be kind of thrown out there anyway, which I think healthy. I think he could have handled it, but being a freshman and having to work through an injury while playing for the first time, that's a lot on a guy, man. So I think they probably made the right decision here, even though I'm sure, knowing Marquis, I'm sure he wanted to play. And like Chris said, I mean, they could have used him. Like, he was going to make an impact. You're probably talking about him potentially starting at this point, but it is what it is. That is part of the game, and he will come back from it very, very strong, I'm sure.
We'll hit on some of the injuries that Beamer talked about coming away from Saturday, as well as we wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on a Reaction Monday coming up here on the game.
It's Reaction Monday.
Sponsored by Carolina Honda Powerhouse. CarolinaHonda.com.
Your home of the Gamecocks in the Midlands. 107.5 The Game. Also heard on the Grand Strand at 100.3 The Game. And in the PD at 100.5 The Game in Florence.
Yeah, he wasn't able to finish. We're going to let him see a specialist on Tuesday this week, and should have a better idea then. I don't think what it is necessarily, season ending. We feel like it's something that he'll be able to play with, and we'll know a lot more here on Tuesday.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on a Reaction Monday here on the game. Tyler West and Chris along with you. That was Coach Beamer giving an update on Juice Wells after the game on Saturday. Of course, Juice catching that touchdown on a screen from Spencer Rattler there early on in the first quarter, but going out of the game after that with an aggravation to that foot, as Beamer mentioned. Did have some surgery on that prior to the season starting and seems to have re-aggravated it. But again, won't know the full extent of that until Tuesday when he does get to see a specialist. And, it's been so stop and start with Juice through these first couple of games, kind of been on a pitch count. Again, you're seeing those flashes of what we know he can be, just has not been able to get out there and stay on the field for an entire game just yet.
Yeah, I mean, man, I'll echo the same thing I said about Marquis. Like, you hate it for Juice. You hate it for South Carolina. Very tough situation. I thought on that, he had a catch earlier in that first drive as well, was running around. I think his mind was in a good place too. Like, it felt like he was confident in the recovery of the foot. He looked, Georgia looked like they didn't want to hit him on that play. Like, that looked like the Juice we're used to seeing. And you certainly, for his sake, just hope this is not something that is going to keep him out for the season, because he just has been unable to get going because of, coming off of injuries. And, Beamer said on the broadcast that he had surgery, which is something we've heard, we've known, but that's never been said until then, which I think tells people that. So he wasn't playing through an injury, so to speak. He was playing through the recovery, which is why we expected him to sort of get better and better as the season progressed. So he did have the prior injury, quote, fixed, if you will. But now the fear, Beamer said also on the broadcast, the fear is that, he broke a bone in his foot. So he will see a specialist on Tuesday. They will obviously get more details then. But, you hope for the best for a guy who has put a ton into this program during his, 1+ seasons in Columbia. And again, obviously a guy on the field, as you sort of turn the page to that is a massive playmaker for South Carolina.
Well, we are not going to see – we have not seen yet – I don't want to make a definitive statement. We have not seen – the optimal South Carolina offense. And that's with the realization that, you said it earlier, Wes, this team is not going to become a powerhouse running team overnight. They need to become serviceable in some form or fashion. They're not there yet. But let's just look at the passing game. There have been some good things there, and that is despite not having your optimal receiver lineup at any point. Like, we've seen Amarian Brown and Juice Wells and Xavier Legette on the field at the same time, but we have not seen the healthier version of Juice. Going into the Georgia game, I don't even know that he was 100%, but he was getting closer, right? And I think you saw that. I mean, Juice, I said it earlier, Juice and Amarian Brown are your two best open field guys, probably on the team, certainly at receiver. And then you've got Xavier Legette, who's been as dangerous as anyone we've seen at South Carolina this year with the ball in the air. Just a big physical specimen. And you finally, Amarian Brown wasn't on the field against Georgia, which is going to be a loss, but you finally got the sense of, okay, once they get AB back, Juice looks to be back after he takes, just classic Juice play, take a screen, make a bunch of guys miss, and go score. But now you're not going to see that at least for a while. And so that's hurtful because you got your quarterback playing really well. You just had Juice coming back, might get AB back against Mississippi State, and you're not going to see that now.
Yeah, quickly, did want to mention Coach Beamer did go on to say that they expect to get Amarian Brown back this week, as well as JT Gear, who is yet to play this season, also dealing with a lower body injury.
And I'm excited. I've said it before. I'm excited to see him play. They sort of have eaten away at their depth at that end edge spot as well. Tyreek Johnson did not play in the game against Georgia. They were having to play some guys that affected their depth elsewhere. TJ Sanders was lining up on the outside. We saw him kind of go to that 3-down lineman front. We saw a lot in the spring. TJ Sanders was playing outside. And then Elijah Davis, who has played some at end, some inside as well. He was playing a lot of end on Saturday too. So they've kind of had to get a little bit creative at that spot. So they'll obviously love to get those guys back. I thought some of the other receivers filled in well, particularly for AB's spot. Luke Doty came in and made some plays. Eddie Lewis made some plays. But certainly that dynamic ability that Juice brings you on the outside to have opposite of Legette is something that you're really missing right now. By the way, I don't know how much time we have, but how about real quick, Lane Kiffin's latest troll job, right?
Has to be.
How about Ole Miss not being favored in this game?
Well, I can see that. I mean, it's still Alabama.
Still, though, after what we've seen out of them,
it's still Alabama. For those who didn't see, he said, we've been against Kevin, referring to Kevin Steele, a number of times, worked with him at Bama and against him at Auburn LSU. There seems like there's been a change there, talking about the defensive coordinator. Quote, I don't know what happened after the Texas game, but our guys watching the TV copy and schematically in this last game certainly seems like T-Rob's now calling the defense. Always playing mind games is Lane Kiffin.
And nobody pokes the bear quite like Lane Kiffin. This is going to be an entertaining matchup this weekend.
So now Saban has to get asked about that, right?
Of course he does.
That's but here's the thing I don't know. Did they really observe that? And then Kiffin, rather than hold on to it, said, I'm going to do the opposite and just throw it out there so Saban has to now talk about it?
He retweeted a story quoting him on it. It's just his use of social media is brilliant. It really is.
Yeah, that's he's a special one, that's for sure.
The trolling is
it's top shelf. Also, guys, we don't have time today. This week, I want to do a complete breakdown of Biff Poggy's press conference at Charlotte.
Oh God, that thing is not going to end well.
Phenomenal.
We could spend an entire episode on him alone.
Yes,
that thing is not going to end well. Let me just say that.
He's one of college football's more interesting characters these days. But we'll have plenty to break down, not only from South Carolina on Saturday, but the rest of college football as the week goes along. Reaction Monday rolls along, though, with myself and Colin Taylor coming up next with today's edition of the Halftime Show. We'll take some of your calls and see how you're feeling coming away from South Carolina's 10-point loss to Georgia on Saturday. We'll be right back tomorrow for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs right here on The Game.
Hey guys, it's Susie Schuster, and I am so excited for my new podcast coming out this fall. It is called What the Football with Susie Schuster and the Princess of Darkness, Amy Trask. If you're looking for a new podcast to listen to about jargon, heavy-legged waist benders, this is not for you. We're going to have big girl conversations when we are going super deep to bring you weekly guests that you won't find anywhere else. It is What the Football with Susie Schuster and Amy Trask, wherever you listen.